Picture this. It's mid-afternoon, somewhere in ancient Mongolia around 15,000 years ago, and the main hunting party has settled into position, patiently waiting for a herd of horses to wander into range, exactly the way patient, methodical hunting is supposed to work. Except one guy in the group can't sit still. He's scanning the horizon constantly, fidgeting with his spear, noticing a weird cloud formation, getting distracted by a bird call, shifting his weight every few seconds like sitting motionless in one spot for an hour is some kind of personal torture device. The other hunters are visibly annoyed. This guy is, by every traditional measure of good hunting behavior, doing it wrong. And then, completely out of nowhere, he spots movement in a direction nobody else was even looking. A second, smaller group of horses approaching from an angle the rest of the patient, focused hunters had completely missed because they were locked in tight on the original herd. He calls it out. The group pivots. They come home with double the meat they expected. So here's the question this entire video exists to chase down. Did what we now call ADHD actually provide a genuine survival advantage to ancient humans? Was that restless, constantly scanning, easily distracted guy actually doing something incredibly valuable for his entire group, rather than just being the ancient equivalent of that one coworker who can't focus during a meeting? Stick around because this is one of the most genuinely fascinating intersections of evolutionary biology and modern psychology you're going to come across, and it might completely change how you, or someone you know, thinks about what restlessness and distractibility were originally built for. Let's start with something important to establish clearly right away, because this topic deserves real care. We're not here to diagnose ancient humans, and we're definitely not here to romanticize a condition that genuinely makes daily modern life difficult for a lot of people navigating it today. What we are here to do is explore a genuinely serious, actively researched scientific hypothesis in evolutionary psychology, sometimes called the mismatch hypothesis, which proposes that certain traits associated with ADHD today may have evolved because they offered real, measurable advantages in ancient environments, advantages that became significantly less useful or even outright disadvantageous once human life shifted dramatically toward settled agriculture, formal education systems, and eventually the structured, sit still, pay attention to one thing for hours demands of modern work and school environments. Let's talk about what ADHD actually involves first, because understanding the specific traits matters enormously for evaluating whether they could have served a genuine evolutionary purpose. ADHD, broadly speaking, involves patterns of inattention, difficulty sustaining focus on a single task for extended periods, hyperactivity, a near constant internal or physical restlessness, and impulsivity, acting quickly on impulse rather than carefully weighing options first. In a modern classroom or office setting, these traits frequently create real significant challenges because modern institutions are specifically structured around sustained, narrow focus on a single task for long, uninterrupted stretches of time. Sitting still, following a fixed schedule, ignoring distractions, and methodically completing tasks in a predictable, linear order. Researchers exploring the mismatch hypothesis have pointed out something genuinely compelling. Those exact same traits, inattention to a single fixed focus, constant environmental scanning, restless movement, and quick, impulsive action, map almost perfectly onto behaviors that would have been genuinely valuable, possibly even essential for survival in ancient hunting and foraging environments. Let's dig into hunting specifically, because this might be the single clearest, most direct example of how these traits could translate into real survival advantage. Successful ancient hunting required more than just patient, narrow focus on a single target. It required constant, broad environmental awareness, the ability to notice subtle movement anywhere in a wide field of vision, to detect a faint sound from an unexpected direction, to register a sudden change in wind or behavior of nearby animals that might signal either approaching prey or approaching danger. Someone with a strong tendency toward broad, constantly shifting attention, exactly the kind of attention pattern associated with ADHD today, might have been genuinely better equipped to notice that second herd of horses, that subtle predator movement at the edge of the group's awareness, That unexpected opportunity or threat that someone locked into narrow, sustained focus on a single fixed point might have completely missed. Researchers studying attention and foraging behavior have specifically proposed that this kind of broad, constantly scanning attention style, sometimes contrasted directly against narrow, sustained focus, may have provided a genuine, measurable advantage specifically in foraging and hunting contexts where unpredictable opportunities and threats could appear from any direction at any moment. There's a particularly interesting study worth mentioning here, conducted by researchers studying a population with traditionally semi-nomadic herding and foraging lifestyles, examining a specific genetic variant strongly associated with ADHD today, sometimes called the 7R allele of a particular dopamine receptor gene. Researchers found that individuals carrying this specific genetic variant who maintained a traditional nomadic lifestyle showed measurably better nutritional status compared to relatives carrying the same variant who had transitioned to a settled, sedentary lifestyle, while individuals without that genetic variant showed roughly opposite results, faring somewhat better in settled environments compared to nomadic ones. This is a single study conducted on a relatively specific population, and it absolutely shouldn't be treated as definitive, conclusive proof covering every single ADHD-associated trait or every single ancient human environment. But it represents exactly the kind of real, measurable evidence that makes this entire hypothesis genuinely worth taking seriously, rather than dismissing as pure evolutionary speculation with no actual data behind it. Let's talk about novelty-seeking behavior next, because this connects directly to impulsivity and represents another genuinely interesting piece of this puzzle. People with ADHD today frequently show strong attraction toward novel, new, unfamiliar stimuli and experiences, sometimes described as a kind of restless need for new input, new challenges, new environments, rather than sustained comfort with familiar, repetitive routine. In a modern context, this can sometimes translate into difficulty maintaining consistent, repetitive daily structure, struggling with routine tasks that don't provide enough novel stimulation to hold sustained attention. But consider what this same trait might have meant in an ancient context, specifically regarding exploration, migration, and resource discovery. Ancient human survival frequently depended on successfully exploring new territory, identifying new food sources, recognizing when an established area's resources were becoming depleted, and it was time to move somewhere genuinely unfamiliar rather than staying comfortably put in a depleting environment out of pure habit or risk aversion. Someone with a strong, restless pull toward novelty and new experience might have been genuinely more likely to successfully explore unfamiliar territory, discover new resources, and adapt quickly to genuinely new environmental challenges, exactly the kind of behavioral flexibility that would have been enormously valuable for a species that, as we've discussed extensively in previous videos, eventually spread across nearly every habitable environment on the entire planet. Let's bring in impulsivity directly now, because this trait probably deserves the most careful, nuanced treatment of anything we're covering in this entire video, since it genuinely cuts both ways depending heavily on context. Impulsivity, acting quickly on instinct rather than methodically weighing every option first, can obviously create real problems in plenty of contexts, both ancient and modern. But there are also genuinely compelling scenarios where quick, instinctive action, rather than careful, extended deliberation, would have provided a real, immediate survival advantage. Imagine a sudden predator encounter, a moment requiring instant physical reaction rather than careful, extended weighing of options. Imagine a fleeting hunting opportunity that exists for only a few seconds before disappearing entirely, where someone who hesitates to carefully consider the optimal approach loses the opportunity completely, while someone who acts immediately on instinct successfully capitalizes on it. In these kinds of acute, time-sensitive scenarios, exactly the kind of scenarios that almost certainly occurred constantly throughout ancient daily life. Quick, impulsive action genuinely outperforms careful, extended deliberation simply because the window of opportunity or danger doesn't allow time for the slower, more methodical approach to actually work. Now let's talk about hyperactivity specifically, the physical restlessness component, because this connects directly to something we've discussed extensively in previous videos about ancient activity levels and physical demands. Ancient daily life involved almost constant physical movement, walking long distances, carrying loads, climbing, digging, running, in ways that modern sedentary life simply doesn't require or accommodate. By the way, if you want to go even deeper into the secret lives of ancient humans, I just launched a full course called The Secret Lives of Ancient Humans. 10 modules, 3+ hours of content covering everything we never talk about on YouTube. What they feared, how they communicated, what hunted them, and much more. Plus an exclusive PDF guide included. Link in the description. See you inside. Someone with a strong internal drive toward constant physical movement and restlessness, rather than comfortable extended stillness, might have actually been remarkably well suited to an environment that demanded near constant physical activity throughout the entire day. The genuine struggle modern people with ADHD often report around sitting still for extended periods, in classrooms, in offices, during long meetings, may reflect less some kind of inherent deficiency and more a fundamental mismatch between an ancient adapted body and brain genuinely built for near constant movement, and a modern environment that specifically demands prolonged stillness in ways ancient daily life simply never required for hour after hour at a time. Let's address something genuinely important here regarding group dynamics and division of cognitive labor, because this might be one of the more underappreciated angles on this entire topic. We've discussed extensively throughout this series how crucial cooperation and complementary skill specialization were to ancient group survival, different individuals contributing different strengths rather than everyone performing identically. It's entirely plausible that ancient groups genuinely benefited from having a range of different attention and cognitive styles represented across their membership, rather than everyone sharing the exact same narrow, sustained focus attention pattern. A group composed entirely of methodical, narrowly focused individuals might excel at patient, sustained tasks, carefully tracking a single trail for hours, methodically working through a complex tool-making process step by step. But that same group might genuinely miss broader environmental opportunities and threats that a more broadly scanning, restlessly attentive group member would catch immediately. A genuinely
Let's talk
diverse
about
range
something
of
genuinely
cognitive and
fascinating
attentional
regarding
styles within a
creativity
single
and
group,
problem
rather
solving
than
here
everyone
too,
sharing
because
identical
this
traits,
connects to a body
may
of
have
modern
provided
research worth
real,
mentioning
complementary
directly.
survival
Studies of
advantages with
creative
different
problem solving
individuals
in modern
naturally
populations
gravitating
have
toward roles
repeatedly
that
found
suited their
associations
particular
between
cognitive
certain
strengths.
ADHD related
Exactly the kind
cognitive
of role
traits and
matching
measures of creative
flexibility we
thinking,
discussed in an earlier
including the
video about
ability to
how
generate
ancient
a
groups
wide
handled
range of
individuals who
unusual or
struggled with
novel
specific
solutions to
tasks,
open-ended
problems, sometimes called divergent thinking. Researchers studying this connection have proposed that the same broad, less filtered attention pattern that makes sustained, narrow focus genuinely difficult might simultaneously make it easier to notice unusual connections between seemingly unrelated ideas. Exactly the kind of cognitive flexibility that drives genuinely novel, creative problem solving. We've spent multiple videos in this series detailing the genuinely impressive, creative problem solving ancient humans engaged in constantly, figuring out fire making from scratch, developing poison tipped weapons, inventing entirely new food preparation techniques to neutralize toxic plants. It's entirely plausible that individuals with this kind of broad, restlessly creative cognitive style contributed disproportionately to exactly this kind of breakthrough novel problem solving, precisely the kind of contribution that doesn't require sustained, narrow focus on a single established method, but instead benefits enormously from a mind constantly, restlessly generating new connections and unusual possibilities. Now let's address the mismatch piece of this directly and specifically, because this is really the central, crucial concept tying this entire video together. The mismatch hypothesis doesn't claim that ADHD traits are universally good or universally bad in some absolute fixed sense. It claims something more specific and genuinely interesting, that these traits evolved in and were genuinely well suited to a particular kind of environment, unpredictable, demanding broad environmental awareness, requiring frequent movement and quick action, full of acute, time-sensitive opportunities and dangers, and that modern environments, especially formal education systems and many modern workplaces, look almost nothing like that ancestral environment at all. Modern institutions generally demand sustained, narrow attention on a single predetermined task, extended physical stillness, careful, methodical deliberation rather than quick, instinctive action, and rigid adherence to externally imposed schedules and structure, essentially the near complete opposite of the kind of demanding, unpredictable, broadly aware, physically active environment that these traits may have originally evolved to handle so effectively. This reframing matters enormously because it shifts the entire conversation away from these traits are simply deficits towards something genuinely more nuanced and, frankly, more scientifically interesting. These traits may represent a normal, even valuable, point along a natural range of human cognitive variation. Traits that proved genuinely advantageous in one kind of environment and create genuine, significant challenges in a very different kind of environment that human social structures shifted toward relatively recently in evolutionary terms. With the rise of agriculture, settled communities, formal schooling, and modern workplace structures, the traits themselves haven't necessarily changed at all. The environment surrounding them has changed dramatically, and that mismatch between an ancient adapted brain and a radically different modern environment may explain a meaningful portion of the real, genuine struggles people with ADHD experience navigating modern institutional structures specifically designed around a very different cognitive style than the one they happen to have. Let's be genuinely careful and balanced here for a moment, because intellectual honesty matters enormously on a topic like this. And it would be irresponsible to present this hypothesis as fully settled, universally accepted scientific consensus. The mismatch hypothesis remains a genuinely active, ongoing area of research and debate within evolutionary psychology and psychiatry, not a fully proven, universally agreed upon explanation for ADHD's origins. Plenty of researchers raise legitimate, thoughtful questions about how directly we can actually connect modern ADHD diagnoses, which involve a complex combination of genetic, neurological, and environmental factors, to specific ancient survival advantages. Given how genuinely difficult it is to directly study ancient cognitive and behavioral patterns with the same precision we can apply to studying living people today. Other researchers point out that severity matters enormously here too, since even if certain milder versions of these traits provided genuine advantages in ancient contexts, more severe presentations might have created real challenges in ancient life too. Sustained inattention severe enough to miss an approaching predator, or impulsivity severe enough to trigger genuinely dangerous, poorly considered actions, wouldn't have been advantageous in any environment, ancient or modern. This isn't a clean, simple story where these traits were purely beneficial in the past and purely problematic now. It's a genuinely complicated, actively researched area where the honest answer involves real uncertainty alongside some genuinely compelling, evidence supported pieces. Let's talk about something genuinely important regarding modern relevance here, too, because this connects directly to why this particular evolutionary question matters beyond pure historical curiosity. Understanding ADHD through this kind of evolutionary, mismatch-focused lens has genuinely influenced how some researchers and clinicians think about support and treatment approaches today, shifting at least some conversation away from a purely deficit-focused framework toward thinking more carefully about environmental design. How can modern environments, classrooms, workplaces, daily structures be adjusted to better accommodate this particular cognitive style, allowing people with ADHD to leverage genuine strengths like broad environmental awareness, creative problem solving, and quick decisive action, rather than forcing every single person into an identical, narrow focus, extended stillness structure that genuinely doesn't suit every human brain equally well. This doesn't mean ADHD doesn't involve genuine, real challenges that deserve serious clinical attention and support. It means the conversation around those challenges benefits from understanding exactly why certain environments create more difficulty than others, rather than assuming the struggle reflects some kind of simple, fixed personal deficiency, rather than a genuine mismatch between cognitive style and environmental demand. Let's bring in one more genuinely interesting angle here regarding group leadership and decision-making roles specifically, because this connects directly to topics we've covered in previous videos about ancient social structure and hierarchy. It's entirely plausible that certain ancient leadership or specialized roles specifically benefited from exactly the kind of broad awareness, quick, decisive action, and restless drive toward exploration and novelty that we've been discussing throughout this entire video. Someone responsible for scouting unfamiliar territory ahead of a migrating group, for instance, would have genuinely benefited from strong novelty seeking drive and broad environmental scanning rather than narrow, sustained focus on a single fixed task. Someone responsible for quick tactical decisions during an active hunt or an unexpected confrontation with a rival group would have genuinely benefited from quick, decisive impulsivity rather than extended, careful deliberation that the acute situation simply didn't allow time for. This suggests certain ADHD associated traits may not have just provided general survival advantages spread evenly across an entire population, but may have specifically suited certain individuals toward particular specialized roles within their group, exactly the kind of role matching and complementary skill distribution we've discussed extensively throughout this series as a genuine hallmark of how ancient human groups successfully organized themselves. Now let's circle back to our hunter from the opening scenario, the restless guy who couldn't sit still during the patient wait but ended up spotting the second herd that everyone else completely missed. Based on everything we've actually covered here, his particular cognitive style, exactly the kind of restless, broadly scanning, quickly reactive attention pattern strongly associated with ADHD today, wasn't necessarily a flaw the group simply had to tolerate despite his apparent inability to focus properly during the hunt. It may have represented a genuinely valuable, specifically useful cognitive contribution, complementing the more patient, narrowly focused hunters around him, providing exactly the kind of broad environmental awareness that caught an opportunity the rest of the group's collectively narrower focus had completely missed. The annoyance his fidgeting and distractibility generated in the moment doesn't necessarily reflect the actual, longer term value his particular cognitive style brought to the group's overall success. So, did ADHD actually benefit ancient humans? Based on the mismatch hypothesis, genuine supporting evidence from studies on nomadic versus settled populations, the clear theoretical logic connecting broad environmental scanning and quick decisive action to ancient hunting and foraging success, and the genuine documented connections between certain ADHD associated traits and creative, flexible problem solving, the honest, carefully qualified answer leans genuinely toward yes, at least for milder presentations of these traits within certain ancient environmental contexts, while acknowledging real, ongoing scientific uncertainty and debate around exactly how directly and completely this evolutionary explanation accounts for the full, complex reality of ADHD as understood and diagnosed today. These traits likely weren't universal advantages in every single ancient context either, since plenty of ancient tasks genuinely did require sustained, patient, narrow focus that these traits would have made genuinely difficult. But in the specific recurring contexts of broad environmental threat detection, opportunistic foraging, exploration of unfamiliar territory, and quick, decisive action during acute, time sensitive situations, there's genuinely compelling reason to believe these traits provided real, meaningful survival value. Value that simply doesn't translate cleanly into a modern world built almost entirely around sustained, narrow focus and extended physical stillness. And maybe that's genuinely the most valuable, humanizing takeaway buried in this entire topic. The struggle so many people with ADHD experience navigating modern classrooms, offices, and daily structure doesn't necessarily reflect some inherent personal failing or simple lack of effort and discipline. It may genuinely reflect a fundamental mismatch between a cognitive style that evolved to handle a very different kind of environment. One full of unpredictable opportunity, genuine physical demand, and acute time sensitive decision making, and a modern world that, for entirely understandable historical and practical reasons, ended up structured almost completely around the opposite set of demands. The restless hunter who couldn't sit still during the patient wait wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just operating exactly the way his particular brain was built to operate, in an environment that, on that particular afternoon at least, genuinely rewarded exactly that style of attention, and brought his entire group home with considerably more meat than anyone expected.